over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Well, greetings all. Good afternoon. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us today. And we know that over the last few days, there have been a number of developments between the United States, Iran, and the settler colonial state of Israel. Where are we today? And is it still possible that we're headed towards a nuclear war or World War III? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that unpack the broader historical context in which most events take place, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. The issues before us today are Iran. What are we to make of Israel's preemptive strike on Iran, Iran's response, and the U.S. attack on Iran? Are we moving closer to nuclear war? Also, have these most recent events distracted us away from the conflict in Ukraine? My guest today is a former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer who served in the former Soviet Union implementing arms control treaties in the Persian Gulf during Operation Desert Storm and in Iraq, overseeing the disarmament of WMD. His most recent book is Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika. Scott Ritter. As always, Scott, welcome back.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So Trump has proclaimed repeatedly that the U.S. bombing of Iranian nuclear enrichment facilities was an unmitigated success. Quote, the sites that we hit in Iran were totally destroyed, and everyone knows it, end quote. Let me see. Do we have the video? Are we able to play that video, Melody? Okay, I don't think we are. So with that, so with that, Scott, your thoughts on these proclamations by the president as well as the vice president that their sites were totally destroyed. He even used the word obliterated.
You know, the problem when you use language like that, obliterated, it's not a formal military term. So when you're looking to assess damage done, you know, unless the checklist has changed, I don't think there's a checklist that a box at the bottom says obliterated.
But Scott, everybody knows it. Everybody knows it.
Apparently, but to do battle damage assessment, you have to assess a target, and the first thing you have to assess is what is your intention in striking this target? What level of damage do you want to achieve? Once you determine that, then you have to say, how do we ascertain that we have achieved this damage? I mean, what are we looking for visually, et cetera? And then you bomb it, then you collect your intelligence, and people like me pour over the data and take a look at the damage that's observed, compare it to, what we know the target, what it should have been before struck, and say, did we accomplish the mission of degrading it to X, Y, and Z? And that's it. So if the president said, look, our goal in striking Fordo was to generate sufficient vibrations in the surrounding geology that the centrifuge cascades that are installed inside Fordo would basically vibrate themselves out of existence because they're very sensitive to vibrations. So you strike it, you get the place to shake, rattle, and roll, and you can say, we have degraded these centrifuges. And then you combine it with, saying we also bombed the entrances and exits so that you can't get in out. We created a grave. So everything that's in there is dead, but we made sure it was dead with our bombing. So we have a high degree of confidence that we accomplished this task. I don't think there'd be too much. Who's going to challenge that? Say, oh, no, Mr. President, you're wrong. You dropped 12 of the world's largest bombs on a mountainside. There's no way you generated vibrations. I mean, people are going, that makes sense. Yeah. If the president could add to that, our Israeli allies had troops on the ground with seismic sensors who, measured the seismic activity at the location, and the seismic data combined with, the available geological readings leads us to give a strong degree of certainty that we achieved the vibration level we wanted. Well, okay, Mr. President. The problem is that that president didn't do that. We obliterated. Why? Because this isn't about military objectives. This is about political objectives. Mm-hmm. This is about the president creating a political impression. He literally is trying so hard to get the Nobel Peace Prize. And, he has behaved irresponsible. Giving the president Nobel Peace Prize for stopping the Iran-Iraq war is like giving an arsonist firefighter of the year because he set a building on fire and then helped put it out. This president started this war. This war would not have happened without this president. And to give the president, the credit for ending this conflict after both Israel and Iran had just basically become punch-drunk idiots, again, is just too much. But this is what this is all about. And so a skeptical media backed up by a skeptical population starts to ask questions, and he takes umbrage. He takes it personally. The degree to which you have Trump's acolytes, sycophants, coming to his rescue and chastising the press underscores just how political this is. Because if this was about genuine military action, as I told you, there's the appropriate way not to spin this, but to sell this. That this is a strike that could be easily sold to the American people. But the problem is when you sell it truthfully, then the reality that this was a military mission and why we were doing it. I mean, you start getting into details like, vibration, centrifuges and all that. People might ask the question, wait, so you're worried about centrifuges, Mr. President? Yes, we bombed this site because they have 2 halls of, advanced centrifuges. But Mr. President, were those the only centrifuges in Iran? No, there were other centrifuges at the Natanz facility. We bombed that as well. Okay, but besides Natanz and Fordo, was there any other centrifuges? No, we don't believe. Mr. President, what about the fact that Iran stopped declaring centrifuge manufacturing to the IAEA in January of 2021 because of your withdrawal from the JCPOA? And we don't have any idea how many advanced centrifuges Iran has or where they're located. So does it matter that you blew up Natanz and Fordo, Mr. President? Have you really degraded Iran's centrifuge capacity? All Iran has to do is assemble 264 centrifuge cascades using the IR4 or IR6 centrifuge, link them with some sort of linking pipe, and then they've got 400 kilograms of uranium hexafluoride enriched 60%. Did you know that, Mr. President? Oh yeah, uranium. Uranium's bad. We got the uranium. Do you know where the 400 kilograms is, Mr. President? No, but we got it all. We obliterated it. No, you didn't, Mr. President. There's 400 kilograms of, uranium hexafluoride enriched to 60%. That's one enrichment cycle away from becoming weapons grade uranium. And the Iranians have any number, potentially thousands of centrifuges that they've produced since 2021 that are not under the auspices of any control, accounting, whatever. The bottom line is you don't have a clue what you did, Mr. President. You bombed 3 sites, 2 of which had already been struck and probably destroyed by the Israelis, but you bombed 3 sites that were emptied of anything of value. And the things of value are gone. You don't know where they are. So you use words like obliterated to disguise the fact that you don't know why you attacked this site other than the grand piece of theater to win you the Oscar that you want. But we don't call the Oscar, we call it the Nobel Peace Prize.
I had read reports that Iran had stated they were digging another facility, and no one seems to know where that other facility might be, and that some of, if not a lot of the material might have been moved to this new undisclosed location.
Well, let's even make it worse than that, Leon, because I mean, Wilmer, I'm sorry.
Please do.
Sorry, I'm so tired. I'm just like Ritter, Leon, Nixon. But I apologize for that. That wasn't meant to be disrespectful. I've been speaking nonstop, so my brain is just non-functioning. But it's functional enough to remember back in 2005, 2006, when Israel and the United States were making noises about bombing Iran, the Iranians started digging evacuation sites throughout Iran. The one thing the Iranians are very good at is digging. I remember when I went to Tehran in 2006, my official Iranian government interlocutor, because the Iranian government decided they didn't want to cooperate me after the Ambassador Zarif at the United Nations said, "Oh yeah, here's your visa, come on in. We got you all set up. Everything's going to be great." I arrived in Iran. They went, "Hey, you just got rid of that former intelligence officer, right?" "Yeah, we're not too sure we want to do business with you. So sit in your hotel for a while." So I walked around Tehran without restrictions. But he said, "Why don't you go down to this location and just tell me what you see?" And at this time. So I went down there and I hung out, and I saw a bunch of guys that looked like North Koreans. And I came back and I said, "A bunch of guys look like North Koreans." He goes, "Why do you think they're here?" I said, "I don't know, missiles?" He goes, "No." I said, "We do missiles. Why do you think they're here?" I said, I don't know." He said, "They're the best in the world at digging. These guys do tunnels better than anybody, and they're teaching us how to dig. And we're digging everywhere. We're putting everything underground." And they started digging these evacuation sites. Ferdo, the facility that Trump bombed, didn't start life being dug out of a mountain to be a nuclear enrichment facility. It was one of these many evacuation sites that the Iranians said, "Hey, rather than just evacuate nuclear material here, why don't we turn this into an underground centrifuge cascade so that if the enemy bombs Natanz, we have a backup." And that's what it was. But my point is, there are dozens of these facilities, Ferdo-like facilities throughout Iran. We don't know where they are. And you're right. The Iranians were talking about opening up a third underground facility. But because of the actions, that was never declared. But, that's probably been, ventilation, wiring, power, all the things that would be needed are probably there, which means that's a likely candidate for the Iranians to install, a couple centrifuge cascades to bring in that uranium hexafluoride to 60%. They probably also evacuated because the Iranians, like the Iraqis before them, know that the best way to survive a bombing attack is to make sure anything of value that's in the site to be struck has been evacuated. So they probably evacuated, pilot scale ability to convert uranium hexafluoride into metal and to work that metal. And now I just told you how the Iranians can make a bomb. Now, I'm not saying they are doing this, but what I'm here to say is that we don't know. and we just pissed them off. Excuse my language. We bombed them. Israel bombed them in violation of international law, Pearl Harbor type event, a decapitation strike, killing their senior leaders, killing nuclear scientists, targeting the supreme leader. And this was Iran's red line. They said, if you bomb our nuclear facilities, we may change our whole posture on nuclear weapons. And so we don't know what Iran's doing. My feel is that Iran is going to continue to do what it was doing, which is adhering to international law, meaning that they will not seek a nuclear weapon. But Iran wants to have enrichment. And right now, Donald Trump is saying no enrichment, Israel saying no enrichment. But Trump and Israel are sort of laboring under the pretense that they've set these programs back months, if not years. And I think the reality is they haven't set anything back.
Well, and to that point, U.S. initial damage report, Iranian nuclear program set back by months, not obliterated. Core components of Tehran's nuclear effort were damaged but not destroyed by U.S. airstrikes on 3 different facilities. And this is reported widely, as you know. And this is from a Defense Intelligence Agency assessment. When asked about this assessment, the president dismissed it. Israel told him they had some folks walking around Fordo and they told him it had been obliterated. Trump and Lil Marco summarily dismissed the administration's own DNI, Director of National Intelligence, Director Tulsi Gabbard, when she said the 17 U.S. intelligence agencies unanimously conclude no nuclear program. So with that, where then are they getting their intel?
Well, it's curious. You allude to the Israelis' agents on the ground. That came from the president of the United States.
Right.
Now, if I were Israel, I'd be a little upset about that because I'm pretty sure I know what it means. There was Amos Yadlin, who's a former Israeli fighter pilot who led the Israeli attack on Osirak reactor back in 1982. He was the director of military intelligence when Israel bombed the alleged North Korean Syrian covert nuclear reactor. He came out and he said, look, if the United States doesn't strike this, there's a good chance that Israel will put it's a special forces unit, Unit 5101 called Shaldag. They'll insert them on the ground and they'll take care of the facility. And that's not an empty threat. Shaldag was on the ground guiding in the bombs for the Syrian alleged reactor. Shaldag just last September landed in Syria and went into a underground missile factory that Iran had built for Hezbollah 200 feet down in the mountain and seized control of it and blew it up. This is what they do. And so that's sort of a big deal. And then there's Sayat Matkal, which is a general reconnaissance unit that does the advanced force operations work. They're on the ground doing things. And then, of course, there's Mossad that has their own capabilities. But the bottom line is the president gave away that Israel had some people on the ground doing the battle damage assessment. Now, it's interesting. He says obliterate. He said right after the attack. So what I would imagine is that there were Israeli special forces in the area, and they probably planted some sensors on the ground, seismic activity detectors, and then they had soil sampling and air sampling. And after the strike, they gathered the seismic data, they gathered the soil data, they gathered the air data, and then they took that back for evaluation to look for radiation leaks, things of that nature. But what's curious is after these guys came back the next day, Israel bombed Fordo again, the access roads. Why? I thought those were taken care of. I thought they were obliterated by Trump, but apparently we didn't achieve the level of destruction desired, and it required a reattack. This isn't denigrating the bravery of the American B-2 pilots and their skill and their dedication to service. It's just stating a fact that you dropped 12 bombs on the target and you didn't achieve a desired result, and it required, after immediate battle damage assessment, a reattack by assets available. And again, it shows the complicity between the United States and Israel that, they're sharing battle damage assessment. This was a joint strike kind of operation. But again, the president, he wants a Nobel Prize. He doesn't want to get into details. He doesn't want to talk about the tactics, because then the second you start talking about these details beyond the brave pilots miraculously flew 36 hours, they did God's work, they landed, they're the bravest thing in the world, and I deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. As soon as you break from that script, you have to start asking questions. And he doesn't want questions asked. And that's why he's lashing out at anybody who dares, challenge the narrative.
Interesting. You mentioned this cascading of centrifuges. And for those that don't quite grasp the significance of the physics here, if you could give Scott Ritter Centrifuge Physics 101, just so that folks have an idea, because we've been hearing about these centrifuges, but again, a lot of folks might not quite understand the significance of that.
Oh dear. You guys do know I'm a Marine Corps intelligence officer. That's oftentimes deemed to be counterintuitive or contradictory. And I'm not a nuclear physicist, but I'll do my best. To create a nuclear weapon, let's reverse engineer it. A uranium weapon, you're going to need an amount of uranium metal, uranium-235, which is the specific isotope that's used for nuclear weapons. You're going to need a certain mass of it, purified metal form. And the goal here is to take this mass, and you're going to take a slug out of it, and then you're going to build a rifle tube. You can put the slug down here, and there's going to be a high explosive charge there. And at the time you want it to fire, the gun's going to fire off, and this slug is going to come in and impact. And as it impacts, the impact of that is going to turn the U-35, it's going to go critical mass. That means it's going to start blowing out neutrons and everything. And next thing you know, we have fission, and we get a nuclear explosion. 90 pounds of that should give you about a 20 kiloton result, roughly what we saw for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We didn't test that bomb in World War II because the physics are automatic. If you can get that gun to fire and you get that slug to hit, off it goes. But now, how do you get the metal? The metal, to get this metal, you have to get raw uranium out of the ground. That uranium needs to be processed, cleansed. You mill it and all this stuff, and you create something called yellow cake. Yellow cake then is a powder. You then have to start converting yellow cake. The first thing you do is it's uranium tetrachloride or something. I think it's UF4. And salt, they call it. So then you will convert it again to uranium hexafluoride, UF6. Uranium hexafluoride is you're creating a solid, but the solid under certain pressures and temperatures will convert to either a liquid or a gas. What you want is the gas, and so you'll have it in a container, and you're going to take this container and you're going to turn it to gas, and now you're going to bring it to centrifuges. See, what you're doing is you're taking the uranium hexafluoride, which is natural uranium, and you're going to start spinning it. And natural uranium is, again, correct, I think it's 236. But you're going to enter it into centrifuges, and the centrifuges are going to spin. And as they spin, they're going to start to separate the isotopes. And so what you want is that this U-235 isotope that's in amongst the uranium to start separating, because it's a different weight than the rest of the uranium. And it separates and it accumulates. And so you have a cascade. So you'll run it through spin, and it runs through the cascade, then you collect it on the other end. And after a certain number of spins, you start to concentrate the enrichment level. And if you do that enough, you get the enrichment up to 90%, which is weapon grade. Now you take that gas and you have to take it to a conversion. So you convert it back to a solid, and then you convert it to a metal, you purify it, you mold it, and you're back to that slug, and turns it into a weapon.
To my audience, as the director of the political science department at Hampton Institute would say when we were in class, I hope you've been taking copious notes, for you will see this again. No, Scott, that was outstanding. Thank you. That was outstanding. There's also a report that came out today. The IAEA says that additional impacts from strikes may have caused localized contamination. And one of the things that I had been talking about with some of the previous guests was, if the United States had been successful in striking Fordo and some of the other sites, could that cause a release of contamination that could wind up, if the wind's blowing in the right direction, blow into Israel?
With what we just talked about, the answer is no.
Okay.
The uranium hexafluoride, when it's stored in a solid, or if you bomb it, what's going to happen is you're going to break the canister. The danger is when that's exposed to moisture, water, it converts into a liquid and gaseous form. The gas becomes hydrogen fluoride. That is a highly toxic gas. I used to be a hazmat responder, and one of our nightmares was going to ammonia. Skating rinks use ammonia to freeze the rink. Some of them do. And if you get an ammonia fire, ammonia spill, you have to be very careful, because you couldn't bring in water, because if the water attracts, then it converts into hydrogen fluoride, and now you've got even a more toxic cloud going on. So I've always been scared of hydrogen fluoride, because it causes cancer, among other things, and it kills you. But so that's the contamination that was going to happen. Is you're going to get toxic chemicals spilled. There could be a limited cloud that floats to areas, but generally speaking, it will kill itself out. The solution to pollution is dilution, and after a while, the cloud just disperses and the toxicity drops. But you can have localized toxicity. And if you've taken that, because remember, what you're starting with uranium hexafluoride is natural uranium. It's as radioactive as life. Meaning, in fact, it's less radioactive than background radiation to certain things. As you enrich it, of course, you get increased radiation potential. And so when you spill it and you have the toxicity, there will be particles that will be emitting beta rays, and beta rays over time, if you inhale it, gets in your lungs, can cause cancer and all that stuff. But this isn't about Chernobyl. This isn't the equivalent of a giant radioactive cloud floating and killing people. That's why I'm always like, when they're like, and we detected no release of radiation. Well, you're probably not going to, unless you're right on the target, because otherwise it's not like you're going to get a glow. It's not Chernobyl. It's not 3 Mile Island, not Fukushima.
Got it. Well, and thank you for clarifying that. You talked about Trump wanting the Nobel Prize, and there's been this report of consternation or conflict within the MAGA world, that there are those that wanted this done. There are those that did not want this done. Your thoughts on Donald Trump, the peace president, as many thought he would be? Where are we with that whole discussion now?
Yeah, I mean, it's when we talk about MAGA and Trump, you got to stick to the facts, and you got to be honest here. Donald Trump ran on a platform of peace. There's no doubt about that. He said he didn't want us to get involved in wars, entangling wars in the Middle East, etc. But Donald Trump was also all over the map, because as candidate, he said Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. And if Iran chooses to pursue a nuclear weapon, then we will use military force. He made that clear too. At the same time, he was making it clear that the United States doesn't have regime change intent towards Iran, that we can live well. But it all came down to, we're going to get a new nuclear deal, and this is going to make the world safer, peace through strength is his other mantra. But the MAGA crowd always emphasized the peace, but they ignored the through strength. They forgot that this is Donald Trump. This is fire and fury Donald Trump. This is the guy that went before the United Nations in his first term and threatened to nuke North Korea, made fun of Little Rocket Man and fire and fury. And, that did lead to diplomacy. But for a while there, everybody's going, whoa, what are you doing? So here we have the president acting out on what he said. The interpretation was that Iran had become a nuclear threshold state. I actually agree with that analysis. That doesn't mean they're producing a nuclear weapon. They made the decision to, but Iran had the capability of producing a nuclear weapon. And that was problematic, especially for a president who ran on a platform that said Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. And when you combine that stance with Israel, who is very hostile to Iran, you get a president who's willing to set Iran up to fail. To the way to solve this problem isn't to enter into lengthy negotiations and make compromise, but to strike Iran to destroy this program. And so this is what the president did, but he did it in a very crafty way. He let Israel start it, carry responsibility, be the initiator of the war of aggression. He stepped in at the end game when everything was desperate. The world's wondering what's going to happen. And he steps in with this grand piece of theater, 7 B-2s, 14 MOPs, 4 or 5, F-35s and F-22s and tankers and everything. That, it's made for a movie. The Bridges of Tokari, Part 2. The centrifuges of Ferdo, and the heroic pilots doing their thing, and he comes back and they land and it's safe. Nobody killed. Oh, the Iranians fired missiles, but it turns out it was a secret backroom deal. Nobody got killed. And so the president can say, I didn't kill anybody. No American servicemen. I didn't kill anybody on the ground. And I brought this war to an end. Peace through strength, baby. And MAGA is confused. MAGA is confused. You have the steadfast loyalists to Trump who, he'll never do anything wrong, who are just screaming, this is the greatest thing in the world. And you got others going, but you didn't have to do this. I mean, why are you doing this? We don't want to go to war. We don't like B-2 bombers flying over. What if it had gone wrong? Then we're sucked into this conflict. And so there is a debate within MAGA about, President Trump and his posturing. And it's real. You see a deep split. Some of the people that helped, Trump get elected, the Joe Rogans, the Tucker Carlson's, Steve Bannon, they're saying this is bad Trump. We don't like this war Trump. We wanted peace Trump.
This could have gone Jimmy Carter hostage rescue bad.
Yeah,
it could have, for those as old as we are, that remember the failed helicopter, the crash in the desert, and because had that gone well for Jimmy Carter, we might have had a different president. But that's a whole nother. That's just an example. That's a whole nother. So your thoughts now on all this discussion regarding ceasefire talks and what seems to be capitulation by Iran. Am I misreading this? Because, well, go ahead and answer that.
Well, I wouldn't call it capitulation. Iran didn't start this war.
Correct.
Iran was attacked, a brutal attack, Pearl Harbor type event. And Iran has complied with international law. It cited Article 51, the right of self-defense. It went to the Security Council. It filed its complaint. And then it rightfully linked its continued retaliation to Israeli attacks, saying early on, if Israel stops bombing us, we'll stop retaliating. Now, there were many in Iran who postulated that, we're going to hit the killing strike. I mean, as people do during wartime, they wave the flag and they do all this. And the war flag was flown over Qom Mosque and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, the Iranian government conformed in totality with international law, did everything right. And so I don't know how Iran, capitulated. Both countries were punch drunk. Both countries were punch drunk. I mean,
and elaborate on that, because a lot of folks really don't grasp. Israel took a serious whipping here.
Well, let's just remember, it was Netanyahu who was panic calling Donald Trump, saying, I need a ceasefire by the end of this week. We can't go any longer. We've got issues. We've got airplanes that are going to be falling out of the sky because they need to be maintained, but we can't maintain them. We're running out of interceptor missiles, and the population's not happy because the Iranians keep blowing the crap out of our neighborhoods. Please make this thing come to an end. And so Trump, did his thing. But Iran was all too happy with accepting the ceasefire because, look, the Iranian missiles did what they were supposed to do. They penetrated the missile defense shield. We don't know the exact percentages yet, and it'll be a while till we do because this is a classified number for the Israelis. The Israelis continue to want us to believe that only 31 impacts. So I'm not much of a Marine, and my mathematical skills are limited to the fingers on my hands and the fingers on my toes. But I know that there were many nights when I was counting more missile impacts than fingers on both hands and toes. So I don't buy the 31 impact story. But, so Iran fired missiles, but people also tend to forget that Israel has one of the most advanced air forces in the world, second probably to the United States, maybe Russia. But they have, F-35s, F-22s. They have all the fancy toys. They've got the weapons, the standoff weapons, the bombs. They got the drones. They got the intelligence collection, the electronic warfare. They got it all. And they got pilots who train all the time. And the pilots are very skilled pilots. And they have an intelligence service that, regardless of what you think about the state of Israel, it's a very competent intelligence service. They were able to locate Nasrallah and put bombs on a target, killing them. They were able to infiltrate pagers in a multi-year operation to the Hezbollah leadership and blow them up. I'm not condoning what they did. I'm just saying that takes a lot of preparation, a lot of skill. And they were able to, over the course of the past 10 plus years, build up an army of drone operators inside Iran, an army of drone operators operating out of warehouses with trucks all over the place that wreaked havoc with the Iranians. So the combined Israeli attack was very effective. Both sides were punch drunk. The Israelis were exhausted by the missiles, and the Iranians didn't have a solution for the Israeli Air Force and the drones. They were starting to clean up the drones, but they're everywhere. And so both sides, when the opportunity came to bring this thing to an end, took advantage of that. I think it took getting Iran to the point where they had run out of options that wouldn't be suicidal. Iran was at the point where if they actually hit American bases designed to, inflict casualties, the United States was going to jump in, and this would have been problematic because Iranian air defense had pretty much collapsed by this time. Their other option was to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. This would invite, a massive intervention and alienate the world. China came in and said, don't do it. Our economy depends on this. So they couldn't lose China. So, I think Iran was at the point where they were like, if we stick it out here, we're going to have to do some sort of radical escalation that's going to have this thing expand well beyond the current fight. And we're not ready for that fight. And the Israelis were like, we can't take many more of these missile barrages. So at the same time, two punch-drunk fighters agreed to stop throwing punches. But this is not a ceasefire. Donald Trump called it a ceasefire, but there's no written agreement. Iran hasn't signed anything. Iran continues to say, we enjoy the right of self-defense. If Israel attacks us, we will respond. The Israelis are saying we have a ceasefire, but we're monitoring Iranian behavior. And if they behave, in a threatening way, we will resume our actions. None of this is in writing. It creates a very volatile, fluid situation that could spin out of control at any minute.
In fact, the Iranian representative was very clear in saying, we do not have a ceasefire here. To your point, he was very clear on that point. To your earlier point, and I'm glad you brought up China and the mining of the Strait of Hormuz, because a lot of people got confused on the reports that Iran was moving to do that politically, that their parliament had decided to do it, but the supreme leader hadn't made the decision as to whether or not to follow through on that. So thank you for that clarity. Are there any signals being sent to you with Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi was in Moscow on Monday, President Putin condemned the, quote, unprovoked aggression towards Iran, end quote. And then you also had, you have Russian Defense Minister Belousov meeting in Beijing with the Chinese. Are these normally scheduled meetings and processes? And Robert Brown, thank you so much for that super sticker, greatly appreciated. Or is there more to be read into these conversations, Scott Ritter?
Oh, the bottom line is the norms and standards that we use to evaluate Israeli-Iranian relations before June 13th no longer apply. These are two nations that have both crossed red lines. Iran has struck Israel decisively, and Israel has struck Iran's nuclear programs. These were unthinkable acts. Previously, these represented the escalation of escalations, but now we had 12 days of this, and we're alive. But the thing is, those red lines have been crossed. The other thing is, both sides learned from this, and whatever happens in the future isn't going to be a replay of what happened in the past. I think Iran realizes it needs strong allies and strong support. That Israel, backed by the United States, is an unbeatable hand politically, and virtually unbeatable militarily, unless Iran's willing to commit suicide by shutting the Strait of Hormuz and attacking oil fields, with both Russia and China won't support. So, Iran has learned some things about the limits of their plan, and Israel has also learned some things about their limitations. I think Iran's going to seek to redefine the playbook that's available to them, putting a lot of emphasis on diplomacy, getting the Russians and the Chinese to start running interference for Iran in the international community at the United Nations, and maybe even beginning to sign mutual assistance treaties that could have a defense component. So I think Iran's looking at entering into a hopefully for them prolonged phase of diplomacy that's designed to buy time while they recover from this this fight. The Israelis did a lot of damage, not just to nuclear facilities, but everywhere. And Iran needs to reconstitute. Israel has to do the same thing. It needs to reconstitute. And it needs to also understand that the United States is a fickle ally. I mean, you heard Donald Trump chastise Benjamin Netanyahu using the magic F word. Then get turned around called daddy at the United Nations. I thought I was watching something other than the news for a moment. Israel also is going to have to reshape its game plan. And so what you're seeing here is a lot of posturing right now between both Iran and Israel to line up allies, line up support, and to reconstitute capabilities, refocus other capabilities, because sadly, I don't believe this conflict's over. I think this conflict will go on until which time Israel is either beaten into submission, and that didn't happen this time, or there's regime change in Iran and the theocracy collapses and a new government comes in that's willing to give up the nuclear program in totality. But so long as Iran insists on the right to enrich, the United States and Israel, especially Israel, are going to be, seeking violence to resolve that.
Lion Champion says, what are you talking about? Iran was attacked by Israel and America. And we've already acknowledged that reality. You were very clear at the very beginning of this conversation about understanding that reality. But I think to kind of put this in a centrifuge and to spin it down to its base elements, we know that. But with that, there's a reality that Iran can't defeat the United States in a head-to-head confrontation. And so Iran has to be incredibly strategic in terms of how it chooses to respond, when it chooses to respond, and what the response actually is. Because Iran can't fight a war of attrition the same way Russia can fight a war of attrition. I don't think it has the horsepower. So we know Israel illegally attacked Iran. We know the United States illegally attacked Iran. But now, with that understanding, what do you do and how do you do it if you want to live to fight another day? Is that a fair assessment, Scott? Scott.
You got to repeat that last part. The internet's going crazy, and I didn't catch.
Well, okay.
The question part of it. I got the lead up, but you froze on the question.
Okay. So my point is, you were very clear up front. Israel illegally attacked Iran. The United States illegally attacked Iran. We got that. There's no debate. But so now the question becomes, if you're Iran, what do you do and how do you do it? Because you can't, you're not a peer competitor here. So you can strike a hell of a lot of damage. I mean, you can cause a lot of damage. But Iran can't beat the United States as a peer competitor. So Iran has to be calculating, Iran has to be strategic, and Iran has to be very, very thoughtful in terms of how it makes the moves it makes. Is that a fair assessment?
100%. First of all, I think Iran needs to start preparing for the worst case scenario, which is a resumption of military action against it. That means it needs to work with the Russians and the Chinese to reconstitute an air defense and do this very quickly. And this has to be an air defense that draws upon the lessons that have been learned. The Israelis burned a 10-year Mossad operation, this drone operation. They burned it. They made good effective use of it. But now it's largely gone. The Iranians are rounding these drone operators up and sentencing them to death. I think today they killed the first 3. Don't be a drone operator for the Mossad in Iran and expect to get any leniency. So the Israelis have lost specific capabilities, one-ofs, but their reliable go-to capability is a known quantity now, because while the Iranians weren't able to shoot all these things down because the Israelis destroyed radars and stuff, the Iranians did collect intelligence. They're very good at collecting intelligence, and they're very good at understanding what this intelligence means and coming up with solutions. So I think right now the Iranians are working very hard with the Russians and the Chinese to reconstitute an air defense capability that can withstand any future Israeli attack. And I'm not saying the Israelis won't get through, but let's say you degrade Israeli offensive capability by 80%, and then you combine with that the suppression of drones because you've arrested all their operators. Suddenly the Israelis are only 20% effective as they were on the opening night. That's still going to blow up a lot of places, but it's only 20% effective. Iran, on the other hand, has learned a lot about Israel's defensive capability, and if they adjust their ballistic missiles and such, Iran will be able to almost immediately begin, pounding Israel and doing damage. And this time, if you can stretch this out, the next time at 12 days when Israel starts to crack, maybe even sooner, Iran will be floating, saying, "No, we got this, baby. We can drag this thing out as long as we want." The problem is both of them ran out of, not the problem, but the reality is both ran out of steam about the same time. Each one was inflicting blows on the other that were very damaging, very demoralizing. I also think that Iran has to handle this nuclear issue quite sophisticatedly. And what I mean by that is they can't just reject negotiations. They have to enter in negotiations. It doesn't mean that they concede zero enrichment, et cetera, but they have to take, if I were Iran, my starting position is we have to reform the IAEA before we talk about anything else. Grossi has to resign. These inspectors can never come back because they gathered intelligence, and we have to reform the way the IAEA interfaces with us. It's never going to return to what it was, et cetera, and make the early negotiations about that. Because if the United States and Israel are saying, well, we've destroyed the vast majority of their program, we've delayed them months, if not years, that sort of gives the Iranians a timetable to work off of. They don't have to tell anybody that they held on to 400 kilograms of UF6, although it's suspected, or they have a centrifuge haul. They've stopped relations with the IAEA. When the time comes to reestablish relations, Iran will provide a full accounting of what they've done, verifiable through inspections. But at the moment, if I were the Iranians, my initial gambit would be to reform the IAEA, to fire Grossi, and to build an IAEA that is effective as a monitoring organization, but not going to be used as a tip of spear by Israel and the United States. I would also seek to ban any interaction between the IAEA and Israel. I would make that illegal. Israel's not a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They have a nuclear weapons program that operates outside the framework of law, et cetera. But so I think that's it. Iran will probably end up using nuclear negotiations to buy time to reconstitute their conventional air defense systems, and then they'll make their rejection of the terms of the United States and Israel about zero enrichment. They'll make it clear that they're not going to compromise on this. This is the other thing they want. They'll get help here in the United States. The United States will even back away and tell the Israelis, you have to make this compromise. We can't sell a war like this to the American people if there's an adequate venue to avoid a conflict. That's the approach I take from the Iranians, a very sophisticated diplomacy-based approach while you're reconstituting specialized military capacity.
That's a very, very well thought through answer. Two things, or maybe three things. One, you mentioned ongoing negotiations, and it seems as though, looking at the situation in Ukraine, with the negotiations that took place there, that was a process just to allow Ukraine to reconstitute. So that seems to be and then you had the negotiations that on the nuclear side 2 weeks ago that seemed to be more of subterfuge on behalf of the United States as they were planning this attack on Iran. So I'm wondering, when is Iran going to send a missile into Netanyahu's living room? Make a stronger point about the devastation that one could face if they continue down this path. Or maybe I don't understand the full depths of the destruction that Israel suffered, but it would have been interesting to see if the level of destruction of places in Iran were such that CNN would have to report on it, that there would be no way to avoid it. Your thoughts there, and then I want to quickly get your take on what's happening in Ukraine.
We don't know the extent to which Israel was truly harmed because Israel put a blackout on their media. Mm-hmm. What we do know is that the Iranian missiles, where we could observe them, were very accurate. And we know that some of their missile warheads were quite large. Why didn't they take out Netanyahu?
Oh, no. I didn't say take out Netanyahu. I didn't mean, because he has a number of homes. So I'm not advocating, I want to be very, very clear here to the world. I am not advocating for the assassination of a world leader. I should have finished my thought. Sent a missile into a home that he wasn't occupying.
That requires
we can hit you when we want to.
That requires extremely good intelligence. And if you have that good of intelligence, you might as well take him out. But Iran doesn't want to. And the reason is because Iran's very vulnerable. I mentioned this last year. If you remember, when the Iranian president was inaugurated, he had as one of his guests a Hamas official, Hania, I think his name was. And he was assassinated by a drone flown by a Mossad operative. And I said, Professor Morandi, I think you might know who he is.
Yes.
He and I were having a debate status. It's hard to say debate with him because we agree on so much, but we were having a conversation, and I said, the Israelis just proved they could kill anybody anytime. They have this capability. Aren't you concerned? And he said, well, no, we're willing to die for our motherland and all that. But I'm like, yeah, a bold statement and remember, Morandi, somebody fought in the war, got gassed, got shot. I will never denigrate his courage at all. So, but I'm just like, it's easy for old men like me and Morandi to sit here in our chairs and talk about doing something. Although maybe we both, walk the walk at a certain time of our lives, but it's another thing to be the actual leader of Iran and initiate a sequence of events that will inevitably come back and have you killed, the president killed, your leadership killed. Because once you get in the regime change, heads of state assassination game, this is why Putin hasn't taken out Zelensky, because he's the head of state, and there's a certain taboo for that. Because once you get in the business of political assassination, the sword cuts both ways. So I think the Iranians.
And that's why I wanted to be very clear that that's not what I was advocating for that very reason.
But I'm just a simple Marine, because when I hear put a missile through a window, I'm like, well, generally results in dead people. And if it's Netanyahu's window, but I get what you're saying. You're just talking to a very simplistic, violence-oriented gentleman here. So, I think regime change at this juncture's off the table. But I just want to remind people that in 1991, at the end of Desert Storm, when American forces defeated Iraq, and then in April, we imposed a disarmament regime on Iraq that was supposed to handle their weapons of mass destruction that threatened Israel. The Israeli government said, that ain't enough. And they said, if we're going to solve the Iraq problem, we have to kill Saddam Hussein. And they began planning for an assassination. The final dress rehearsal of this assassination took place on November 7th. If it had succeeded, a week later, they would have been at a funeral outside of Tikrit in the village of Auja, and they would have made an attempt on Saddam's life. That's what they believe. But my point is, if you think for a moment that Iran can pummel Israel the way they did, because remember, Iraq only fired 49 missiles into Israel. Here, the Iranians have fired over 500. The Israeli policy towards Iran is regime change, and that isn't going to change ever. And I think Iran needs to recognize this fact that the Israeli government will not rest until your government, the Iranian government, is eliminated. And
until Raza Pahlavi
brings in a different dynamic.
Until Raza Pahlavi is back in charge.
When I first, God, I'm going to say something mean because I shouldn't talk because, I got a beaker like you wouldn't believe. But when I first saw his nose, I was like, wow, that's got to be Photoshopped. And they went, nope, that's real. And I went, I guess there's a reason why they call it the peacock throne, because that boy has a beak. But anyways, sorry, bad humor. But he ain't going to go back. If he stepped 1 foot inside Iran today, he'd be strung up by the neck until dead. The Iranian people aren't going to welcome back the Shah, the progeny of the Shah.
Final question for you, Scott. Was some of the United States' intention on bombing Iran when they did, and the whole escalation that we've been seeing, was to distract people away from what's not happening or what is happening in Ukraine? Because we haven't talked about Ukraine.
It's curious you mentioned that. I think it's not just about the.
Go ahead.
Are you there?
Yeah.
No, you went spinning for a while. My internet's going crazy. I think the FBI's got a kill switch on it. But my impression is that Ukraine and Iran are two totally different problem sets, and that there was no connectivity between the two until the very end, when the president saw the timing potential of bringing it in for the conflict and then taking that with him into the NATO summit. But I think that was serendipity as opposed to pre-planning. But in the middle of this conflict, people tend to forget that, after, Israel bombed Iran and then Iran began to send missiles into Israel, that very night, Moscow blew the crap out of Kiev, just one of the biggest strikes ever, and nobody talked about it. Zero discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Russian forces have completed the liberation of Lugansk. Russian forces have advanced into the suburbs of Sumy. Russian forces are advancing, into Dnipropetrovsk, and nobody's talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the reality is that Ukraine no longer has our imagination. We're elsewhere. And when you lose the focus of the American people, you tend to lose the focus of our leadership, because the leadership does things to appease the public. And I think that's playing out at the NATO summit. I mean, Mark Rutte can call Donald Trump daddy, and that can make Donald Trump very happy. He literally said, "Who's your daddy?" or "I'm happy." I forget what the exact word he said, but it's just like reading it going, what? But this whole NATO thing is all about, servile, caving into Donald Trump based upon Iran. There's hardly any discussion about Ukraine and Zelensky and all this. Trump's having a meeting with him about precious metals and rare earth minerals and things of that nature. But how in the past Zelensky dominated. I need money. You're going to get missiles. We're going to fight the Russians till the death. Slava Ukraina and all this stuff. None of that's happening. In fact, Zelensky's sort of been shunted to the sidelines here as NATO is doing their best to kiss up to King Trump, because he literally walked in like he was the king of the world. And I think that's what's going on here, is that Trump took advantage of events to shape them to his benefit. And once again, Ukraine pays the price.
Wow. Scott Ritter, as always, thank you so much for your time. Greatly, greatly appreciate that analysis. Outstanding as always. And looking forward to talking to you soon, Scott.
Okay, Wilmer. And again, my condolences for your situation. And I hope
thank you.
I hope to see you in Washington, D.C., golf clubs in hand sometime this summer.
We'll make that happen. I appreciate, thank you, and really appreciate it, Scott. Thank you. Folks, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned. Again, won't have a show tomorrow. I have a funeral to attend, and but we will be back on Friday, and Ajamu Baraka is going to be our guest on Friday. Please follow and subscribe. Those of you that are listening and viewing on other platforms, please go to YouTube and subscribe there. Share the show. You can find us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, and talk without analysis is just chatter. And we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all on Friday. And until then, peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.